A warm welcome to you, Jayme Fishman. Great to have you with me today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jayme, you are the Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Avalara. You're responsible for overall corporate and product strategy, mergers and acquisitions, high growth business units. You must be a very busy man. I am assuming compliance is a high growth business for Avalara. Which is one of the reasons why we're talking today. It would be great just to start off with what your read is of where the market is, the e-invoicing market is today.
Yeah, well, as a tax company, obviously we're keenly following the e-invoicing market and been participating in it for several years now, because it starts from a tax deficit ultimately that governments are trying to remediate through this legislative activity that we've seen unfolding at a really unprecedented pace and scale, which as a provider, is obviously exciting to us. But if you're a company out in the market, it can be, quite daunting, because now you've got this set of requirements you've never had to deal with before. You've been transmitting and receiving invoices the same way for potentially decades, and you have to adapt, and it can be expensive. So we acknowledge all of that, but we think, a few things. One is that notwithstanding, those investments will tend to pay off, because automation at the end of the day is a benefit to just about any organization. And there's a real cost to compliance without a government mandate for the transmission and receipt of a particular invoice. And so we think our job is to democratize the technology to make that burden of entry as low as possible, knowing that companies are going to struggle to keep up.
Question for Avalara, having 21 years in tax, right? So Avalara's been a tax software company since 2004, very successful, and I understand largely in tax determination, if I'm correct. Now, given what's happening today with country mandates and ViDA, this big drive in Europe that's happening, but mandates happening right across the globe, what would you say is Avalara's vision?
Yeah, so it's funny, when Avalara started out in the tax market, they had a vision of being a born in the cloud provider who could democratize a capability that was previously reserved for enterprise companies with large implementations and engagements that took many months and hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement and go live on, in order to create this outcome that they just fundamentally believed could be offered in a much more accessible way. And so that's the idea of democratization that's at the heart of what Avalara does really well. And that's where you see this prolific reach of integration partners to the tune at the moment of 1,500 plus strong that give access to this platform across a company's technologies, whatever they may be using. And when it comes to e-invoicing, I think that our strategy and vision is very consistent with that, to democratize the capability, to make sure that it's accessible through the strength of our technology partners and our scalable, platform. And at the heart of all of that, what's sort of feeding our motivation is this idea that we want to be part of every transaction in the world, and how can we have the broadest reach of connectivity to facilitate the transactions of companies around the world.
Mm-hmm. Great. I mean, I love that, and it sounds like that ecosystem of partners is growing. I think last time we spoke there were 1,400 partners, so it sounds like something that's really expanding. And I'd like to chat a little bit more about the partner approach and the program and strategy later. But this sounds very exciting. Just to kind of bring it down to how this vision will help a supplier or a buyer manage the complexities of mandates in the short term, but also simplify trading in the long term. What's your response to that?
Well, I think a few things. I mean, firstly, it's sort of a foregone conclusion that they're going to have to participate in these regimes, and that's why they call them, mandates. So it's a little different than tax. In tax, you could use a napkin or an abacus or something to create an outcome, and in the e-invoicing world, you have to participate in some government certified regime, which means that you have to connect, and the connection and the configuration is really at the heart of what we're talking about in terms of benefit to company. And there's obviously ROIs that flow from a process, whether it's voluntary or mandated, but I'll get to that in a minute. But the benefit of easing the connectivity and decreasing the burden of all the configurations and work that has to happen to participate in these regimes, I think is primary. And so what that looks like are standardized connectors that interoperate seamlessly with whatever technologies our customers are using, and have the most sort of simple to use and accessible tools for mapping to jurisdictions where they need to transact in, as well as pre-mapping as many of those jurisdictions as is possible. So everything's as turnkey as possible in terms of where they transact and how they transact. You know, one connection to a global platform that handles all the different formats and requirements around the planet, wherever they may be participating. And then within the application, there's another sort of layer of accessibility where users can self-service the onboarding process. They can register however many legal entities they need to register. They can configure however many jurisdictions they need to configure. And they don't need to go back to you know, any kind of you know, professional services engagement or call us for, you know, turning things on or off for them. They can do all that themselves. So that's a massive benefit. And then, you know, the benefits that flow out of getting online, I mean, it starts obviously with compliance. You want to be compliant with the government requirement, legislative, and then, you know, on the voluntary side, or even in the government side, you want to have an ROI that's palpable for your order to cash and procure to pay processes. And, you know, the transmission and receipt of invoices is a costly endeavor. You know, there's a lot of analog work streams out there that cost real money for companies to transmit these documents and to receive them and to tag all the appropriate data and opportune, you know, sort of activities that go hand in glove with that. Reducing that means that every invoice sent or received is creating an ROI for customers.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you've got the short term and the long term gains there. So
yeah.
So Jayme, obviously heritage in tax software.
Mm-hmm.
Future, I mean, is the future of Avalara in invoice compliance? Is it in tax determination? Is it both? And adding on to that question, where do you see Avalara competing? I mean, there are quite a number of big players out there that would call themselves global players, like Avalara would call
Mm-hmm.
itself a global player. So where do you see yourself fitting against the Thomson Reuters, the SOVOSes and the Vertexes, but also the Tungsten Automations and the Baswares of this world?
Well, I think you know, a few things. In terms of where's everything going, I like to use the term convergence, and I like to describe this magic moment of commerce, which sort of is the fountainhead of all these activities that companies have to engage in when they're contemplating a purchase or a sale, which is, you know, to one company it's a sale and to the other company it's a purchase. And there's always this sort of mirror set of reciprocal compliance and other sorts of requirements that go hand in glove with that magic moment where that transaction is created. So we've always, you know, been a company who's chased manufacturers of technologies, vendors who are offering invoicing technologies because our compliance, you know, attaches to that magic moment. Now, I think what you see is the requirements for things like the way the invoice is transmitted, obviously manifesting in e-invoicing. You see the way that it's being filed changing to this sort of live reporting sorts of requirements. And then you see also other things that spawn off of it, from payments to fulfillment to fraud detection. You know, I think they're all starting to come together. And I think the future is vertical integration of a lot of facets of that magic moment of commerce to increase the relevance of vendors in the offices of the decision makers in these organizations who want one sort of stop shopping to be able to manage a lot of those activities. And the way that we differentiate, I think, from a lot of our competition is that first and foremost, going back to my earlier comments about the benefit we create, that democratization and accessibility, you know, that we've used in the tax industry for so long is real, and it's special, and it's why our tagline is, well, we make tax less taxing, right? And I think we offer the same kind of lens on every sort of service offering that we touch, inclusive of e-invoicing and live reporting. And so it starts there. It's an ethos for how can we make the customer's job, easier? How can we be empathetic to their journey of what it is that they're trying to accomplish and make those tasks more accessible, even, ambient in some level, so they don't have to think about it at all. And the breadth and depth of our technology partnerships means that however they're transacting, wherever they're transacting, it's extremely likely that we've got a way to facilitate that with pre-made integrations and partnerships who are endorsing our applications. And so I think that level of interoperability in this omni-channel world, where some clients are buying and selling in multiple systems, is another major differentiator for us. Having been born in the cloud, it's also noteworthy that we have matured our platform over the last 20 plus years to such a degree that we can say with confidence today, the way that it's architected, it can support architecturally literally every transaction in the world by adding more server capacity. And that's something that's really quite remarkable. We're talking about tens of trillions of transactions. So that's the kind of, I think, difference in us. Born in the cloud, scalable, accessible, omni-channel, all of those things.
Okay, so from a technology perspective, you're saying that having that maturity, having that 20-year advantage, if you will, born in the cloud, it does mean that you are able to, you talked about trillions of transactions across the actual platform is a very kind of sustainable event.
It can scale to that today. We already support billions and billions of transactions. I don't want to give a statistic that's erroneous, but we're roughly ish a billion a week or so today.
Yeah.
And so we've done tests, and we've sort of sized what it would require to, because our I mentioned earlier, our goal is to support every transaction in the world. So what does that mean? And we've quantified it, and we've architected the solution so that just adding more server capacity will allow us to do that with today's technology stack.
Yeah, we'll come on to things like formats as well later. But it's good to kind of get a heads up on the platform and the kind of the established kind of age maturity of the platform being born in the cloud. So before we move on and talk about things like scalability and also Avalara's target market, something that's happening today that you'll be fully familiar with is that all these mandates and these multi-corner models, they're kind of busting the network model. Right? Now you might agree with me or disagree with me. We will find out. But in the kind of the classic days of where it was voluntary e-invoicing and you didn't necessarily have two service providers in the mix, it was just very much buyer mandated in the old days. So in those situations, you would have the supplier connected to the network, and then the network would pass on to the buyer, right? And everything would come through the network. What I'm seeing and I'm hearing from networks is that the invoices that their buyers receive through their network, maybe only 10% of them will come from connected suppliers. 90% of those suppliers will be off network. So networks mandates, you could say, are kind of breaking the networks. What's Avalara's view on this?
I think interoperability with other providers who might be considered competitors is paramount to be able to make sure that our clients can transact with anyone, anytime, anywhere. And so we think about it in an open way. We've got our own network, and when I say network, by the way, what I really mean is it's more of a directory of businesses that can be accessed, almost like an address book, when you think about it. And every company has some semblance of that. And so the trick is, how do we facilitate the discovery, the invitation, and the transaction of these companies with each other to make all those things as easy as is possible. And that is our vision, and everything that we're building at the moment is in service of that in a very open way.
Yeah. Well, so we'll talk about the target market and scalability, and then I do want to come on to partners a bit more. We can flesh out interoperability a bit more there. You've got your existing tax clients, right? And I believe the number 43,000 tax clients rings true. Please correct me if
those I think are what we consider our quote core customers. We have orders of magnitude more customers in different parts of our business, but yeah, those are I think you qualified it with tax customers.
With tax, yeah, tax customers. Okay. Now with e-invoicing, companies like an Avalara will obviously need to onboard existing clients that aren't already using your e-invoicing capability. So those 43,000 tax clients, I would assume that a good portion of those tax clients will need to come online with e-invoicing. And then you've got new business coming online, yes, through your partner ecosystem, but also through your direct kind of approach. So how are you looking to deal with this kind of, I suppose, bit of a tsunami of work coming your way? What's the Avalara approach to handling that in a way that will kind of keep everyone satisfied? The lead times aren't going to be too long, but also it's not going to stretch your organization too much. I mean, what's the view there?
I think it's really consistent with what we talked about earlier in terms of making that onboarding process as simple as possible. It obviously doesn't just benefit the client, it also benefits us from a scalability perspective. And that's exactly how we're approaching it. So existing customers have been using various integrations to connect to our platform for however long they've been transacting with us. And we've been circling back on all the integrations and imbuing them with this additional capability of connecting to our e-invoicing functionality. And so now it's a bit of a mantra of this one connector to rule them all. You connect with whatever the connector is to your technology, and you gain access to all of our services across our entire compliance platform for every solution globally that we support. And so if you take that and consider that covers one of the hairiest parts of an implementation, just establishing that interoperability, and then you pair it with what happens after they connect and their ability to self-service and onboard and add additional jurisdictions with relative ease. I think there's other features and functionality I won't go into too much detail, so some of them are a little on the secretive side at the moment, but those things all kind of conspire to make that task of servicing the existing customers and expanding, with all the new business that we're getting, a much easier pill to swallow.
Okay, and that takes me on to quite nicely to the next question around, and I hear what you're saying. It sounds like there's an ease to operating with or starting to use the Avalara solution for your e-invoicing needs. It's not kind of there's no major heavy lifting involved. It's what I'm kind of picking up here. So does that affect the market that you're aiming towards? Would you say you're more of a mid-market provider or enterprise or both? Where do you see, or where are your clients sitting right now?
So we support enterprise customers all the way down to what we call extremely small businesses and everything in between. It's no secret that we made our start in the middle market. When we came into a tax vertical that was saturated with enterprise vendors and said, companies that are smaller can benefit from these same kinds of capabilities. Let's make it accessible to them. With this democratized sort of connector strategy that wound up, creating the outcome it created for us. As we look at, E-invoicing, we see it the same way. We obviously see that larger companies are the first ones who will have the highest need because they're transacting the most jurisdictions, which creates the most complexity to try and keep compliant with all the different jurisdictions requests simultaneously, and that's not a small task, and that's why very few vendors in our space have a truly global solution like we do. But then, invariably, and you see this in even some of the legislative mandates, the way that they're written, they start off, in B2G, then they go B2B, and it's like, oh, when we say B2B, it's high turnover B2B.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna, we're gonna lower the turnover, and it's gonna start creeping down. And as it does, it gets all the way down to B2C transactions in some jurisdictions, as we've seen, which means invariably mid-market companies are going to need it under a mandate regime. But even without a mandate regime, and this is foundational to our belief system, we think that the benefits that can be garnered from participating in a voluntary e-invoicing structure is great for any company of any size. It is a palpable cost reduction, and so we want to make that accessible to clients in every market segment.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. Absolutely championing the voluntary invoicing programs out there and all the benefits. So that's good to hear. Now, so just kind of following on from that, to what degree do you think your core solution? It sounds like there's a self-service element to your core solution. And that kind of ease of integration maybe doesn't need the SIs involved as much as maybe the other players require their clients to have them involved. So my question to you is, how comfortable do you think enterprise clients are with that approach? Do you think it's unfair of me to say that an enterprise market or a large organization might want systems integration, mapping, testing support, and they might be looking for this to be a bit more of a heavy duty program. They don't want to just API into something. Do you think that's unfair? Do you see your large clients
First of all, I don't want to leave you with the impression that you can't access complexity if you want to access complexity in our platform. We try to make it as streamlined as possible so that if you don't want to, which is I think the default case for a lot of companies, you don't have to. On the other hand, we also recognize that companies, when they implement ERP systems, often have heavy customizations within their technologies that they're using, and those don't always lend themselves to default pre-mappings. And so while in a lot of cases we could get a very high percentage of the way there in a default, for the most standard business objects that we need to map to all of these country e-invoicing regimes, there's always going to be some, especially in enterprise, that are going to require user intervention to say, well, we did something special in our company. We created these custom objects, and here's what they mean, and I'm going to map them to your tool. But even that we make easier by providing user interfaces and tools that make that process a lighter lift. And we do work obviously with SIs, and a lot of the bigger companies, are trying to figure out exactly what it's not just like, hey, I'm going to implement this technology. It's like more like, hey, I'm going to redo my order to cash and procure to pay workflows, and I'm going to work with my trusted advisors to figure that all out, and they're going to make sure that they help test. And we do also provide testing, sandboxes and things of that nature. So we have a very robust platform, for e-invoicing and for tax, and I think it supports whatever sort of mindset you have. How deep do you want to go? Well, you can go that deep, or you can stay a little higher level and make it easier.
Yeah. Okay. So and the larger enterprise organizations, and these are countries, these are clients that when they go live in one country, they'll want to make sure that the next country they roll out, it's going to be a faster experience. They'll be able to repurpose a lot of what they've already done for the original setup. And that approach obviously is sustainable, scalable. It helps them move through this really long roadmap at a bit more of a clip. So can you tell us a bit more about how Avalara is organized to manage these enterprise customers who are looking at quite a lengthy roadmap?
In terms of the process itself for the mappings, or can you offer me a little
But
more what
yeah,
that's what you're looking
yeah.
for?
So a client is looking to roll out in one country, and they roll out there with Avalara. The comfort that you could give that client, that they will be able to take a lot of the learnings and the integrations from that particular country and be able to extrapolate it out to other countries that become in scope. So then they're not having to start from scratch every
Oh,
single
got it.
time.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's important to understand the way the technology works. We have a single global API for all the countries, and we try to normalize as much as possible and take into account the differences on a country by country basis. So the good news is there's a lot of commonality. Where at the end of the day, we're talking about an invoice. There's a lot of common fields. There's standards like PEPL and DBNA and these open, kind of networks, and a lot of those have been adopted in some way, shape, or form by different countries who are enacting their own flavor of those things, their own schemas that need to be mapped. And so we're able to then point out where all of the overlap exists across all of the countries that we support, as well as where there are differences. And we even account for those differences as much as possible with pre-mapping tools that we provide to help facilitate the leveraging of what's already been done, and then the adjusting for what's different in the jurisdictions that they're expanding into.
Yeah, great. And you've got this partner ecosystem. I think you talked about 1,500 partners in the ecosystem. So in terms of that ecosystem, and I understand all the benefits are huge, and I get it conceptually. But could you talk to me a little bit about support desk? So when something does fail, and things fail with transactions or just go lives and project implementations, what does the support look like for that supplier buyer when they're working with you and the ecosystem?
So customers have access to our support organization. We've got staff who are very adept at relaying the intricacies of e-invoicing requirements and mapping them to technology and troubleshooting whatever types of issues a customer may be encountering. Our technology also does a pretty good job at surfacing, because our platform's been maturing over the last 20 years, and so we're very good at surfacing useful information to customers within the application itself as to what may be going wrong. And then as part and parcel of that, we've infused artificial intelligence into our users' experience so that they can ask our AI agent within the application on a near instantaneous basis in just about any language, what it is that they're trying to figure out, and it can respond and even surface materials that are helpful to them to sort of troubleshoot those things. But we have a combination of a support system that supports hundreds of thousands of tickets annually for the platform, and then beyond that, we've also got all of this artificial intelligence and built-in sort of error messaging within the application.
Great. Okay, let's move on. So that's great. Now, beginning of last year, February 2024, Pagero was acquired by Thomson Reuters for 800 million. Now, Avalara did make a bid for Pagero, I think if I'm right in saying, for $700 million, and Vertex also put a bid in there. So there was a big appetite at the time for Pagero. So a couple of questions on that. I mean, Thomson Reuters ended up winning the bid, as it were, and making the purchase. So it does open up quite a few questions. So is there anything in particular that Avalara regrets, you might regret, when considering how Pagero didn't end up being part of the Avalara suite? Any regrets or anything that you're grateful for?
And so, no regrets whatsoever. I think when our acquisition strategy really revolves around a couple of pillars where it's all predicated on acceleration of either features that we're bringing to market or critical mass of a feature or customer base. And in this particular case, if you wind the clock back, not that long ago, but long enough in technology world to where since then we've had an opportunity to really dig in and mature the platform quite rapidly. And so I think from a feature functionality perspective, we're incredibly pleased with where we are, and it's one of those things. I guess if there is a gratitude that I would sort of inject into it, it's the way that we've approached the work that we've done with our product roadmap in the e-invoicing space is again pretty consistent with the way that we approached it in the tax automation space, and because of that, I guess I'm grateful for the fact that it spun off a lot of benefits that we didn't necessarily recognize were unique to our company, but in point of fact, they are, and all the things that we talked about with the democratization are real. And so I think it's worked out really well for us, actually, in the end.
Yeah. Okay, because in 2021, Avalara acquired Invoicing. So had the Pagero acquisition gone through, it would have liaised with Invoicing. So in terms of kind of I mean, what you were just saying there, your M&A strategy, and obviously it's to support the growth. Where do you see something, a kind of a gap or a lacking ahead, which could perhaps encourage a future purchase? Is that something that you see kind of in the short term for Avalara, not for the rest of the market, but for Avalara, that you can talk about?
I wouldn't describe, our investment criteria as something that we're necessarily lacking at this moment. What I would, I think a better description might be, can we accelerate, an area where we're investing or accelerate the product roadmap? The funny thing about that is that we're in a really interesting time, right? With the advent of AI and I should say with the advent of the newer AI and how powerful it is and how much it can do for an organization. We're I'll say AI enthusiastic to probably not even do what we're doing over here justice. But the point is that features and functionality and prototyping previously took a much longer amount of time before everyone had access to these tools is much more rapid for us. And so I think it really does kind of put a different lens on the investment criteria when you're looking out in the market and somebody does a particular facet of what you're going to incorporate into your product well. And then, there was always been this analysis as part of mergers and acquisitions where you say, well, how long would that take us? And, how well and robust did they make their product? And then, that used to be a different analysis than it is today when you're weighing, what can AI help me do that's similar to that on what time scale? So I think it's becoming less and less of a motivator for us. And there has to be some pretty unique attributes of a target company, including things like, managerial acumen and subject matter expertise, and a local presence obviously is still something that we're interested in. When we see a mandate that requires, a local presence, and you find that the longest part of the project isn't developing the software that's required to be compliant with the legislation, but rather to stand up an entity and have a tax ID issued in some jurisdiction. Yeah. Those are things that we found are actually at this point in time more valuable to us.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to hear. So just kind of throwing open the perspective a little wider to the general market. And as coming back to this convergence, I think you mentioned the word convergence of automation and compliance, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, it's clear that Avalara is in itself that convergence, but you've got these other companies that are making acquisitions to kind of become that convergence for automation and compliance. So I think it's fair to say there are going to be quite a few mergers and acquisitions ahead in the next kind of couple of years. I mean, what's your view on this, and how do you think it affects buyers and suppliers?
Well, I mean, convergence is a double-edged sword, right? You know, on the one hand, there's a high appetite, I think, to transact with a single party to standardize on service level agreements and contracts and relationship management and all the other things that are quite a hassle in the business world. The more vendors that you're dealing with, certainly. And of course, on the other hand, if too few companies proffer a bona fide convergence, with vertical integration, then there's always that counter side of the sword that's pricing sensitivities and how accessible is it from a commercials standpoint. And but I think that for the most part, especially with all the companies that are out there trying to solve it, we're going to see high competition. We're going to see better vertical alignment, and I think it'll be good for the business consumer market.
You do, okay. Now, just focusing on the technology a little bit more, we talked about it a bit, and you talked about the role of AI, so using AI agents. Just building that out a little bit more. I mean, the end user, the buyer and the supplier, they care about the platform, the user experience, the features, the functionality. So a couple of questions. How would you say that the Avalara's core functionality is different to those providers that were maybe born in the e-invoicing world, not cloud as such, but world? So like Tungsten Automation and Basware. How would you say the core functionality differs from what they're offering?
When you say core functionality, I just want to make sure I understand the scope of your question. Are you talking about just the e-invoicing part of our platform as opposed to tax? Yes. Or you? Okay.
Yeah. So focusing on the e-invoicing bit as opposed to any of the tax bit.
Well, I think the later you enter the market in any particular vertical, the more likely it is that you'll have taken an approach that acknowledges some of the struggles of predecessor companies who've been at it a while. And this industry is a pretty interesting one because it was born from this low growth, slow growth kind of EDI, AR, AP automation market before the mandates really kicked into high gear. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the technologies that were being deployed were in service of just trying to create an ROI, absent a government mandate. And they were all different, and there was no shortage, of them, and still is no shortage of them in terms of, AR, AP, automation. And I think because of that, the way that a lot of companies, kind of grew up, so to speak, they started with technology that was doing it for different reasons, and then and it had different feature sets because of that, was not standardized because of that, and they had to evolve into this new mandated e-invoicing world. And as such, I think they got a lot of technology debt to deal with, and the design choices that they made are probably different than the design choices they would have made if they started from scratch today. And I think that's an advantage that favored us quite a bit. On the one hand, we bought an existing player who was, very much steeped in EDI and had made a foray into e-invoicing, but we acknowledged that they had the bones of what we needed. And this is the way we do mergers and acquisitions. We buy something and we make it better and different in our platform. And we lifted and shifted that technology into a new stack, put a global API on it, made it part of our global platform. And so we just had the advantage of having, thought differently about, the problem that we were solving because we weren't, born in the market for AR AP automation all those years ago.
Yeah. So that takes me on to, I've got, I think, only 3 more questions left. So it takes me on to a question on pricing. So pre what you've been, pre the kind of the hockey stick curve where the mandates came in and the direction of travel was all e-invoicing. So before that, some of the big networks that we know about, we talk about, I mean, it was, as you said, it was a no growth, slow growth market, right? It was a real slog to make money and to be profitable for these technology providers. It still is an expensive game, and I absolutely hear what you're saying. The technology is changing at such a pace that, and you're learning from all the players that kind of came before you. So you've got that as an advantage, but there is still that kind of expensive part to running an e-invoicing platform. So coming to your commercials, I think the general consensus is that you're offering a pricing structure that is very competitive and very attractive to the market, and disruptive. I think it could be classified as disruptive to your competitors. I'd love to hear your views on that. But my question to you is, it's multifold. So number one,
Okay.
I mean, given the commercials, is Avalara prepared to, I mean, you talked about being a global player. Are you prepared to support every mandate, i.e. support the mandate in Pakistan, support a possible mandate in Morocco? And if so, how do the financials work? Because if to go into each country, it can cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. Please tell me if you think otherwise. But sometimes $500,000 it can cost an organization to be established within a particular country. So if you're coming in at quite a very attractive price point for the end user, but the costs are high, how do you make the business case work?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot.
Some of the premise, I think I would modify a little bit. So let me take one step back and answer that. What I think was the first part of your question is, how do we do it? Why do we do it that way? So what we've tried to do is follow that ethos of simplicity that we have in the product and the platform into our pricing regime. And so it should be really easy to expand into a new market, into a new country, and the pricing shouldn't be different, here, there, and everywhere. And you shouldn't have to worry about, well, is there a surcharge for signatures or surcharge for archiving or 10 other things that you could be hit with because they are different in that geo than they are where you might have been transacting before. In order to do that, we obviously want to control as many of our own endpoints as we can to keep the cost down, which we've done. But to your point, it is expensive in terms of the proposition to enter into a new geo, depending on the requirements of that geo. Because I will say that in the absence of a physical presence requirement, it really is a technology lift at the end of the day, which is not as expensive as you may believe, because we're pretty adept at standing up the technology in a pretty short timeline, and then it becomes solving for physical presence jurisdictions, of which there are no shortage, certainly, and we prioritize obviously the newer ones and the older ones that we didn't have when we first bought Imposia, and we're prosecuting all of those. But should we start to encounter physical presence jurisdictions that would require costly investments in less, say, transactionally trafficked geos, then of course, like many of the providers, we always have the option to partner for a period of time as that jurisdiction's maturing, or if it's going to be low transactions for the foreseeable future, that's on the table. But we try to keep that to a minimum because we feel as though our big, hairy, audacious goal of being part of every transaction in the world, it is a real bona fide objective that we have. And so how do we do that? Well, we give ourselves the broadest range possible.
My final question to you, Jayme, is what do you actually want the listener to remember about this interview?
That Avalara is different by design, that we're a single global platform that's accessible for all their global compliance needs, so that they can, plug in and transact with anyone, anytime, anywhere in a compliant manner, and that the experience will be different and better, hopefully, than what they've experienced in the past.
Okay. Jayme, it's a real pleasure. So thanks for the time today, and I know we'll catch up
Thank
again
you.
soon.